let people take their seats real quick. Hola, yo soy Sarah Griffs, soy ingeniera en Nueva York. Esta es mi primera vez que hablo en una conferencia. My name is Sarah Griffs. I'm an engineer in New York City. This is my first time speaking at a conference. Today I'd like to talk to you about Xavier, and this is a tool that we have created at Slice. So themes of this talk are going to be collaboration and being scrappy. So I'm not a die-hard Python person, and I know this may sound like blasphemy to say this at a Python conference, but I've used R, Stata, and Sass for statistical programming, Ruby, Swift, Objective-C for software engineering, and I typically find that it's best to use the tool that's best suited for your needs at that time, rather than focusing on a specific language. But in this story, Python suited our needs. It allowed us to be very collaborative and also very scrappy. And I'm glad that I did so that I could come to this conference. So I'm going to be showing some code today, but it's mostly pseudocode. So if you'd like to see the full code, you can go to my GitHub and look at it as we go through Xavier 2.0. But first I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Slice, the company I work for, and why Xavier came into being. Then I'll go through Xavier 1.0, just kind of the bare bones Xavier, what we had for that, the refactor that we did for Xavier 2.0, and what you can possibly expect from Xavier 3.0. Okay, background on Slice. As you might expect, with the name of Slice, we're in the pizza business. We want to provide the best local pizza experience to our customers. So this means competing with big pizza. Big pizza is Papa John's, Pizza Hut, Domino's. These are the types of companies that can provide tech resources like websites, like Alexa skills, like pizza buttons. But if you think about your mom and pop shop, they don't have the resources for that. So that's where we come in. We help them sell their pizza on the internet through online ordering. So this is our engineering team and some other people. But we grew from 4 people when I started to about 15 in October. So fun fact, you can order pizza through Facebook. Did anybody know that? You can also order other food, but we only do the pizza part of it. So last October, our strategy team with Facebook said, hey, let's get together and let's do this partnership, which for us as a startup is a huge deal. So I was on the team, I was leading this team that needed to build this product that would hook into Facebook, a huge deal, and we had 4 weeks to do it. So we decided to revamp our infrastructure for projects like these and build a core API. This core API would house all of our main business logic. And in doing so, we'd be able to hook it into other potential partnerships. But for this case, it was to hook into Facebook. So we have our core API. It would feed into our Facebook API. And then Facebook would take that information and let people order pizza on Facebook. Unfortunately, we're mostly a Ruby shop, so we weren't using Python for this part of the project, just Ruby on Rails. But besides rapidly developing on these 2 APIs in 4 to 5 weeks, it was also my responsibility to manage dev process and be a liaison to product people. So our dev process was just kind of a standard agile workflow. And we use Trello to do this. Like any process, it wasn't perfect at the time. It's still not perfect. But there were 2 pain points that were just particularly painful. The first was that our process included manual steps. So we had this merge column. This is where, if you on a successful merge to master, you end up in the merged column. And this is sort of the end of what our continuous integration was, using Circle CI. But then after a production deploy, we wanted to have these cards moved from this merge column to this done column. But in Trello, there's some hookups in Jira and things like that. But in Trello, there's nothing standard out of the box that hooks up to that. So because this process was manual, it's very subject to human error. So for example, let's say we do a production deploy, and I'm supposed to move the cards and I don't. Then we do another production deploy. At this point, I don't know which cards in this merged column are in production or which are just merged. So this was an issue. We also didn't have any release notes. So we didn't have anything that would say, hey, on this date, this was deployed, and these were the pull requests or stories attached to it. So product didn't know what was out there and when. So if a bug came up, if they were looking for a feature and wanted to know, is it ready, I couldn't tell them that with complete certainty. And this, not only was it a break in my concentration, as I was trying to lead this team developing 2 APIs in 4 weeks and hope that it works with whatever Facebook's producing. It's also a little embarrassing as the team lead when a product person or a business person, an exec, maybe your founder comes up to you and says, hey, I see this bug on our iOS app, or in this platform you're developing, what went out yesterday? And you have to say, I don't know. So I decided that this was starting to get unacceptable and we needed to fix it. So we started work on Xavier 1.0. And in my mind, the only responsibility of Xavier 1.0 would be move the cards from one column to the next. But in collaborating with our DevOps engineer, he also felt the pain of no deploy notes. This was important to him. He was responsible for production deploys and rollbacks. So we decided we'll add in deploy notes. And in collaborating, he was interested in learning more Python. And I have always sort of been interested in DevOps and kind of dabbled here and there in the Amazon world. So we decided to do a skills swap, if you will. I would learn some Python, he would learn some Python, I would learn some Ansible and some DevOps. So I like using Python because it's readable in nature. It allows even beginners to contribute and collaborate on projects. So it aids in that human element of collaboration. So I want to show you just the stripped down code of Xavier 1.0, and it's basically pseudocode. This first part, I'm not considering it a step, but it is important for later on. This is about parsing arguments, and I'll talk about that more in the DevOps section. So the first step is just find that merged column and create a column next to it with a date on it. And then Xavier takes all of those cards within the merged column and creates attachments in a JSON format. And this JSON format is dictated by what Slack can input. So we had to move these cards so often from the merged to the done column. It was very tedious, it was boring. So our flag for move the columns became Trello Snack. So if you Trello Snack, then you move all the cards. And finally, just alert on Slack. Just take all of the deploy notes, post them to Slack, and then people can see what's been posted. So in addition to collaboration, Python was a great choice because we could be really scrappy. We could use a lot of different tools. I found in the little bit of DevOps that I'm working in, Python integrates very well, as does in data engineering and things like that. So it's very flexible. So for example, in this project, this is the Trello, a screenshot of the Trello API. And when I'm working with APIs, I like to start with paw. And paw is, it's a GUI where you can add in a request you're interested in, you can add in headers, you can add in URL parameters, and then you can see in your response, you get a nice like JSON response. And when you're comfortable with that request, if you want to get the code for it, all you have to do is export it, and you can export it right to Python using the request package. So then I'll take that code and move to a Jupyter notebook, and iterate on this code. So you can see, like, for this block, at some point I had run it 168 times. So it allows for like very quick development. And what was really important was that Ansible's main modules are written in Python. And it also uses a template language called Jinja 2. So that's within these curly braces. So it made sense to kind of stick in the same environment of Ansible and Python. And we're also mostly using Ubuntu. Ubuntu comes with Python. We don't have to install extra dependencies. You may have thought, well, why didn't you use Ruby? Because we do a lot of things in Ruby. That would have required an additional install. We're in the process of containerizing, so Docker, Kubernetes, all those good things. And we don't want to have to, we're trying to strip down, we want to minimize dependencies. Being scrappy. So Xavier 1.0, this was something that was immediately useful to me, but it became something that a lot of people looked at. Product engineering, even our business execs. I think this is a sign of a good tool when people start asking for it. People start saying, hey, can you add in this feature and this feature? But we didn't really have time in the 4 weeks that we were developing 2 APIs to do any of the feature requests. So we had this backlog at the end that we thought, okay, we have all these requests. We need to make Xavier 2.0. So these are the requests, some of the requests we had. Engineering said, it'd be great to see what branch is being deployed. Can we get the AWS launch config and rollback info? Can we get the git commit, and can we tag the cards with timestamps? Product and business, we're interested in seeing, depending on the team, having all the cards, the tickets, moved into a daily column. One team wanted their tickets moved into a sprint column. We split out the notes into a production channel and an others channel. This became pretty important when we moved from deploying 3 services a couple times a week to 7 to 8 services multiple times a day. That production, the original channel, became so noisy, our founder said, I want to know what's being deployed to production. I don't want to look through this entire thing where I see a million things to staging, a million things to QA. He's only interested in what's out there in production. So with all of these requests, we couldn't just work with Xavier 1.0 the way it was. We had to do a big refactor. So you can only be, while I do say that it's good to be scrappy and work quickly, at some point you have to go back and look at your code and say, this just isn't going to work for the long term. So we had only one file. And we realized, okay, with all of these requests coming in, we can take this and we can make it a lot better. We can look at the patterns and the structure of the code, and we can abstract that. We can modularize it. So we ended up with a Trello API class This does all of our Trello API requests. We have a card class to hold the properties of that card and functions around it. And then we keep the Xavier logic to itself. So in this way, if we wanted to move to Pivotal or to Jira, or I don't know, maybe some other startup will come up with something cool, we can keep Xavier logic, and all we have to do is plug in different inputs, and we can still have the same sort of system going. So this is Xavier 2.0. I'm going to zoom in on this, so don't worry about trying to squint and read it all right now. It's quite a bit longer than 1.0, so let's take a look at what's happening here. Okay, so parse args. This is still important, and I'm still going to go through it in the next bit. So we create our Trello API class to do our requests. If we do a production deploy, if we want to move the cards, we find the source column, the merged column. We grab all of the cards within that, and we tag them with a time. And then if it's our consumer team, we say, OK, you wanted the cards to just go in the date of January 1st, of January 2nd. If it's our admin team, they just want all the cards to go in this week's sprint. On the team that I lead, we have multiple services on a single board. So when we do a deploy, we need to search through that merged column, find the cards that are relevant to that service, and only move those cards. So you can see this was steps 1 and 3 from Xavier 1.0, so a little bit of rearranging. So we still create, we still create our formatted JSON and have our card text in a way that Slack can read it. And then we post to Slack. So if it's production, we post the production and to the all channel. If it's anything else, we just post to the all channel. OK, so here's the comparison from 1.0 to 2.0. So 1.0, November 10th. You just have a timestamp. We have the timestamp. We have a couple of cards. It's fine. It works. It worked for my purposes. This is 2.0. So we have the service, the environment, the commit, if we want to go back to that, a branch, the live configuration, and the rollback candidate. So developers can now do, in theory, do rollbacks, and all of the card information. So now I want to talk a little bit more about Ansible. But I think to do that, I need to talk a little bit more about our CI and CD process. So once we have a story that's merged into master on our master branch, we were using Snap. And Snap would pick up that build, and it would say, OK, let me run the RSpec tests. If those pass, this double arrow means do this automatically. It would automatically deploy to staging. And then we had a manual step of, if staging looks good, press this button. So you just go in and click this button. And that triggers a production deploy. And the command that it's running for that production deploy is to SSH into this builder box and then run this Ansible code with this YAML configuration, the YAML file, and we have these these variables that go into it. So this is the Ansible code that does Xavier. This is the role, or the task, the role. It's the role. So you can see how the argument parser is why that's so important. And that's because we have to pass all of these things into the Ansible role. So this is really the glue. This is really where the engineering and the DevOps come together. This is the collaborative effort where we had to say, OK, what are the things that we're going to get from Ansible that we're going to pass into the Xavier script? What are the things that DevOps is going to give us the AWS launch config. There's no way for me to get that and pass that into Xavier. So this is just the YAML file. And just for the core API, we can see if it's a different environments, how it does things just a little bit differently. So what's next? What could we do better in Xavier 3.0? We could build an Ansible module. The modules that I've seen are typically written in Python, so there's a lot of good examples of what does a good module look like and what are the typical standards around it. We are moving off of Snap to Worker. So Tom Gamble gave a presentation yesterday about Python in the cloud, and he showed Worker, if anybody saw that. But this is basically like Snap. So if we have tests that run then, and pass, then we deploy directly to staging. And Worker comes with a Slack bot already that's called WalterBot. But WalterBot doesn't move our Trello cards. But WalterBot does post pretty nice looking cards to Slack. So I think for Xavier 3.0, we can get better at our card formatting, what we add to our Slack posts. We can take other open source ideas and put it in to Xavier. Or maybe we'll just find an open source tool that works a little bit better than Xavier. So bringing this back around, this was a really fun project to work on because I didn't know as much DevOps as I do now because of this, because I was able to collaborate with DevOps and learn a little bit of Ansible, learn how their system worked, and in return, they were able to learn Python. So I think, Yamil, in your talk, you talked about engineering and DevOps, and I think this was a great project where DevOps and engineering came together. So now we're moving to Worker, and we're also moving to Docker and Kubernetes. So I'm really hopeful that I can be involved in that process and continue to collaborate on our tooling there. Also being scrappy. So there are a lot of different tools we use to create Xavier, and we'll continue to use a lot of tools. I think DevOps is changing pretty rapidly. Already Snap is being deprecated and we're moving to Worker. We might move to something else. Maybe we'll move to something that we roll ourselves. But with Python, I think it just works well in a lot of different environments. So I want to say a quick thank you to Slice for sending me here. And if you're interested in looking at the code and having some comments or things like that, please do. And then you can just contact me through any one of these methods. Thank you.
So I'm totally going to take the bait. What is the best place in New York City?
So I think the best pizza in New York City is Pauly G's. It's in a neighborhood in Brooklyn called Greenpoint. If you go there, there's a pizza that's called the Cherry Jones. It has these cherries on it and prosciutto, and it's really good. Other questions? I'm so glad I put these up here. Does anybody have a guess? It's nerdy. It's a nerdy answer. Yeah, there you go. Very good. Why do we use it at all? Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, let me bring it up.
Why did you have to
Why did we have to move the cards? Yeah, it's mostly a visibility with with product and our dev process. So anything that is in merged is supposed to be, this is on master and not yet deployed to production. And so anything in done is done out in production.
So it's one part per Git branch?
Typically, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I get it. Yeah.
So your web column is like right in front of that, like
Yeah, Other columns that aren't on the screen are in progress type columns.
It's like an agile kind of thing.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.